Section 17 of the Ingoldsby Legends, First Series. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Ingoldsby Legends, First Series, by Richard Harris Barham. Section 17. A Lay of St. Dunstan. This holy child Dunstan was born in ye year of our Lord 925, that time reigning in this land King Athelstan. When it so was that St. Dunstan was weary of prayer, then used he to work in goldsmith's work with his own hands, for to eschew idleness. Golden Legend. St. Dunstan stood in his ivied tower, alembic crucible all were there, when in came Nick to play him a trick, in guise of a damsel passing fair. Every one knows how the story goes. He took up the tongs and caught hold of his nose, but I beg that you won't for a moment suppose that I mean to go through in detail, to you, a story at least as trite as it's true, nor do I intend an instant to spend on the tale how he treated his monarch and friend, when bolting away to a chamber remote, inconceivably bored by his wittengamote, and we left them all joking and drinking and smoking, so tipsily grand they'd stand nonsense from no king, but sent the Archbishop their sovereign to fish up with a hint that perchance on his crown he might feel taps, unless he came back straight and took off his heel taps. You must not be plagued with the same story twice, and perhaps have seen this one, by W. Dyce, at the Royal Academy, very well done, and marked in the catalogue 471. You might there view the saint who in sable arrayed is, coercing the monarch away from the ladies. His right hand was hold of his Majesty's jerkin, his left shows the door, and he seems to say, Sir King, your most faithful commons won't hear of your shirking. Quit your tea and return to your Barclay and Perkin, or by Jingo ere morning no longer alive, sad victim you'll lie to your love for Elgiva. No farther to treat of this ungallant feat. What I mean to do now is succinctly to paint one particular fact in the life of the saint, which somehow for want of due care, I presume, has escaped the researches of Rapin and Hume, in recounting a miracle both of them men who a great deal fall short of Jacques, Bishop of Genoa. An historian who likes deeds like these to record, see his Aurea Legenda by Wynkyn de Worde. St. Dunstan stood again in his tower, alembic crucible all complete. He had been standing a good half hour, and now he uttered the words of power, and called to his broomstick to bring him a seat. The words of power, and what be they? To which e'en broomsticks bow and obey. Why, 'twere uncommonly hard to say, as the prelate I named has recorded none of them, what they may be, but I know they are three, and abracadabra, I take it, is one of them, for I'm told that most Kabbalists use that identical word written thus in what they call a pentacle. However that be, you'll doubtless agree, it signifies little to you or to me, as not being dabblers in grammarye. Still it must be confessed, for a saint to repeat such language aloud is scarcely discreet, for as Solomon hints to folks given to chatter, a bird of the air may carry the matter. And in sooth from my youth I remember a truth, insisted on much in my earlier years, to wit, little pitchers have very long ears. Now just such a pitcher as those I allude to was outside the door which his ears appeared glued to. Peter the lay brother, meagre and thin, 5 feet 1 in his sandal shoon, while the saint thought him sleeping, was listening and peeping, and watching his master the whole afternoon. This Peter the saint had picked out from his fellows, to look to his fire and to blow with the bellows, to put on the wall's end and lamptons whenever he chose to indulge in a little orfevrerie. Of course you have read that St. Dunstan was bred a goldsmith, and never quite gave up the trade. The company, richest in London, 'tis said, acknowledge him still as their patron and head. Nor is it so long since a capital song in his praise now recorded their archives among, delighted the noble and dignified throng of their guests, who the newspapers told the whole town, with cheers pledged the wine cup to Dunstan's renown. When Lord Lyndhurst, the Duke, and Sir Robert were dining at the Hall some time since with the Prime Warden Twining. I am sadly digressing, a fault which sometimes one can hardly avoid in these gossiping rhymes. A slight deviation's forgiven, but then this is too long, I fear, for a decent parenthesis. So I'll rein up my Pegasus sharp, and retreat, or you'll think I've forgotten the lay brother Peter, whom the saint, as I said, kept to turn down his bed, dress his palfreys and cobs, and do other odd jobs, as reducing to writing whatever he might in the course of the day or the night be inditing, and cleaning the plate of his mitre with whiting, performing, in short, all those duties and offices abbots exact from lay brothers and novices. It occurs to me here, you'll perhaps think it queer that St. Dunstan should have such a personage near, when he'd only to say, those words be what they may, and his broomstick at once his commands would obey. That's true, but the fact is, 'twas rarely his practice such aid to resort to, or such means apply, unless he'd some dignified knot to untie, adopting, though sometimes as now he'd reverse it, old Horace's maxim, nec broomstick intersit. Peter, the lay brother, meagre and thin, heard all the saint was saying within. Peter, the lay brother, sallow and spare, peeped through the keyhole, and what saw he there? Why, a broomstick bringing a rush-bottomed chair. What Shakespeare observes in his play of King John is undoubtedly right, that oft times the sight of means to do ill deeds will make ill deeds done. Here's Peter, the lay brother, pale-faced and meagre, a good sort of man, only rather too eager to listen to what other people are saying, when he ought to be minding his business or praying, gets into a scrape, and an awkward one too, as you'll find if you've patience enough to go through the whole of the story I'm laying before ye, entirely from having the means in his view of doing a thing which he ought not to do. Still rings in his ear, distinct and clear, abracadabra, that word of fear, and the two which I never yet happened to hear. Still doth he spy with fancy's eye the broomstick at work and the saint standing by, and he chuckles and says to himself with glee, "Aha, that broomstick shall work for me! Hark, that swell, o'er flood and o'er fell, mountain and dingle and moss-covered dell! List, 'tis the sound of the Compline bell, and St. Dunstan is quitting his ivied cell. Peter, I wot, is off like a shot, or a little dog scalded by something that's hot, for he hears his master approaching the spot where he'd listened so long, though he knew he ought not. Peter remembered his master's frown, he trembled, he'd not have been caught for a crown. Howe'er you may laugh, he'd rather by half have run up to the top of the tower and jumped down. The Compline hour is past and gone, evening service is over and done, the monks repair to their frugal fare, a snug little supper of something light and digestible ere they retire for the night. For in Saxon times, in respect to their cheer, St. Austin's rule was by no means severe, but allowed, from the Beverley roll 'twould appear, bread and cheese, and spring onions, and sound table beer, and even green peas when they were not too dear, not like the rule of La Trappe, whose chief merit is said to consist in its greater austerities, and whose monks, if I rightly remember their laws, ne'er are suffered to speak, think only in Greek, and subsist as the bears do by sucking their paws. Astonished I am, the gay Baron Garam, with his head savouring more of the lion than lamb, could e'er be persuaded to join such a set. I extend the remark to Signor Ambrogetti, for a monk of La Trappe is as thin as a rat, while an Austin friar was jolly and fat, though of course the fare to which I allude, with as good table beer as ever was brewed, was all caviar to the multitude, extending alone to the clergy, together in hall assembled, and not to lay brethren. St. Dunstan himself sits there at his post, on what they say is called a dais, o'erlooking the whole of his clerical host, and eating poached eggs with spinach and toast. 5 lay brothers stand behind his chair, but where's the 6th? Where's Peter? Ay, where? 'Tis an evening in June, and a little half moon, a brighter no fond lover ever set eyes on, gleaming and beaming, and dancing the stream in, has made her appearance above the horizon. Just such a half moon as you'll see in a play, on the turban of Mustapha Mouli Bey, or the fair Turk who weds with the noble Lord Bateman. Vide plate in George Cruikshank's Memoirs of that great man. She shines on a turret remote and lone, a turret with ivy and moss overgrown, and lichens that thrive on the cold dank stone. Such a tower as a poet of no mean calibre I once knew and loved, poor dear Reginald Hebert assigns to oblivion, a den for a she-bear. Within it are found, strewed above and around, on the hearth, on the table, the shelves, and the ground, all sorts of instruments, all sorts of tools, to name which and their uses would puzzle the schools, and make very wise people look very like fools. Pincers and hooks, and black-letter books, all sorts of pokers, and all sorts of tongs, and all sorts of hammers, and all that belongs to goldsmith's work, chemistry, alchemy, all, in short, that a sage in that erudite age could require was at hand, or at least within call. In the midst of the room lies a broomstick, and there a lay brother sits in a rush-bottomed chair. Abracadabra, that fearful word, and the 2 which, I said, I have never yet heard, are uttered. 'Tis done. Peter, full of his fun, cries, Broomstick, you lubberly son of a gun, bring ale, bring a flagon, a hogshead, a tun. 'Tis the same thing to you, I have nothing to do, and for George I'll sit here, and I'll drink till all's blue. No doubt you've remarked how uncommonly quick a Newfoundland puppy runs after a stick, brings it back to its master, and gives it him. Well, so potent the spell, the broomstick perceived it was vain to rebel, so ran off like that puppy. Some cellar was near, for in less than 10 seconds 'twas back with the beer. Peter seizes the flagon, but ere he can suck its contents, or enjoy what he thinks his good luck, the broomstick comes in with a tub in a truck, continues to run at the rate it begun, and au pied de lettre next brings in a ton. A fresh one succeeds, then a third, then another, discomfiting much the astounded lay brother, who, had he possessed 50 pitchers or stoups, they all had been too few for arranging in groups. The barrels, the broomstick next started the hoops, the ale deluged the floor, but still through the door said broomstick kept bolting and bringing in more. E'en Macbeth to Macduff would have cried, Hold, enough, if half as well drenched with such perilous stuff, and Peter, who did not expect such a rough visit, cried lustily, Stop, that will do, broomstick, sufficit. But ah, well a day, the devil, they say, 'tis easier at all times to raise than to lay. Again and again Peter roared out in vain his abracadabra and t'other words twain, as well might one try a pack in full cry to check and call off from their headlong career, by bawling out yoicks with one's hand at one's ear. The longer he roared, and the louder and quicker, the faster the broomstick was bringing in liquor. The poor lay brother knew not on earth what to do. He caught hold of the broomstick and snapped it in two. Worse and worse, like a dart, each part made a start, and he found he'd been adding more fuel to fire, for both now came loaded with Mows entire. Combs, Delafield's, Hanbury's, Trumans, no stopping. Goading's, Clarendon's, Whitbread's continued to drop in, with Hodson's pale ale, from the Sun Brewhouse Wapping. The firms differed then, but I can't put a tax on my memory to say what their names were in Saxon. To be sure the best beer of all did not appear, for I've said 'twas in June, and so late in the year, the Trinity Audit Ale is not come atable, as I found to my great grief when dining at that table. Now extremely alarmed, Peter screamed without ceasing, for a flood of brown stout he was up to his knees in, which, thanks to the broomstick, continued increasing. He feared he'd be drowned, and he yelled till the sound of his voice, winged by terror, at last reached the ear of St. Dunstan himself, who had finished his beer, and had put off his mitre, dalmatic, and shoes, and was just stepping into his bed for a snooze. His Holiness paused when he heard such a clatter. He could not conceive what on earth was the matter. Slipping on a few things for the sake of decorum, he issued forthwith from his sanctum sanctorum, and calling a few of the lay brothers near him, who were not yet in bed, and who happened to hear him, at once led the way, without farther delay, to the tower where he'd been in the course of the day. Poor Peter, alas, though St. Dunstan was quick, there were two there before him, grim Death and Old Nick. When they opened the door, out the malt liquor flowed, just as when the great vat burst in Tottenham Court Road. The lay brothers nearest were up to their necks in an instant, and swimming in strong double X, while Peter, who spite of himself now had drank hard, while floating a while like a toast in a tankard, to the bottom had sunk, and was spied by a monk, stone dead like poor Clarence, half drowned and half drunk. In vain did St. Dunstan exclaim, Vade retro, strong Barham discede a lay fratre Petro. Queer Latin, you'll say, that prefix of lay, and strong Barham. I own they'd have called me a blockhead if at school I had ventured to use such a vocative. 'Tis a barbarous word, and to me it's a query if you'll find it in Patrick, Morel, or Mereri. But the fact is, the saint was uncommonly flurried, and apt to be loose in his Latin when hurried. The brown stout, however, obeys to the letter, quite as well as if talked to, in Latin much better, by a grave Cambridge Johnian, or graver Oxonian, whose language we all know is quite Ciceronian. It retires from the corpse, which is left high and dry, but in vain do they snuff and hot towels apply, and other means used by the faculty try. When once a man's dead, there's no more to be said. Peter's beer with an E was his beer with an I. Moral. By way of a moral, permit me to pop in the following maxims. Beware of eavesdropping. Don't make use of language that isn't well scanned. Don't meddle with matters you don't understand. Above all, what I'd wish to impress on both sexes is, keep clear of broomsticks, Old Nick, and 3 X's. L'Envoi. In Goldsmith's Hall there's a handsome glass case, and in it a stone figure, found on the place. When thinking the old hall no longer a pleasant one, they pulled it all down and erected the present one. If you look you'll perceive that this stone figure twists a thing like a broomstick in one of its fists. It's so injured by time you can't make out a feature, but it is not St. Dunstan, so doubtless it's Peter. Note. St. Jingo or Django, Gengolphus, sometimes styled the living Jingo, from the great tenaciousness of vitality exhibited by his severed members. See his legend, as recorded hereafter in the present volume. End of Section 17.